Jorge, welcome to the podcast. So excited to have you here. I am so excited to talk to you about your expertise in the short term rental Airbnb space. And we're going to dive into all of that. But first, let's start off with you introducing yourself to the audience.
Hey everyone, my name is Jorge Contreras. I reside in Orange County, California. I've been a real estate investor now for 11 years, 6 years in the Airbnb space. I have a multiple seven-figure short-term rental business, and I'm just excited to be here on the Quiero, Dinero podcast.
We're excited to have you here. And so I am like a baby, brand new Airbnb host, if you will. I just bought my first property in Puerto Rico. And so I'm definitely looking to leverage people like you and your expertise to make sure that I'm doing things right. Because for the folks who've been part of my inner circle for a while, they know I've had like a love hate relationship with the rental real estate in general. And so this is like round two for me. I'm just trying to do things from a way more informed space. And so I want to get to know you and your story. Were you always planning on being a real estate investor, or did this happen like by accident?
It definitely was not something that I was always planning. The way I was introduced to this world is I used to work, my very last job was in 2008. I was a personal banker at Bank of America. I was setting up checking accounts, business, personal. And at the time, I was also setting up the loans. So if people wanted to purchase or do a refinance or a home equity line of credit, I was your guy. I'm 20 years young. I felt like I had my podcast, Janice, without really knowing what a podcast was back then, because in my cubicle, I would sit across from all these super successful Latino entrepreneurs because it was like a Spanish speaking community only. And I just got to learn so much. And I would meet these real estate investors that had, a lot of success. And at the time, to me, real estate investing was like from another universe. I thought it was very complicated. I thought you needed a lot of money. Like I never thought that I would ever be in the place that I'm in today. Fast forward, because of what I learned there, I learned about the basic programs like FHA, and I bought my first property in 2012. But I didn't know how to go and buy my second, my third, and beyond because that required more knowledge, more experience. So what I did is I invested into mentorship and I became a student at the Rich Dad Company in 2015. Within 2 years, 2.5 years, my net worth exceeded $1 million. I now own about $7 million worth of real estate. I own 9 properties. I have 2 developments that I'm working on. And then I got all my subleases and my co-hosting. We have a total of 18 short-term rentals. But so that's a little bit of where I'm at now. But yeah, this was never part of my plan. It was just like little sequences, life events that happened over time that led me to this path.
That's incredible. And the first thing that I have to think about is your childhood, your money story. Like, what were you taught about money? Because I feel like for somebody to have those skills to start building wealth, did you get any information when you were growing up about how to do that? Or was this something that you were self taught?
And that's a great question. I definitely was not self taught. I knew about entrepreneurship at a young age because my parents were entrepreneurs. The challenge is that my dad was in and out of jail. And so I knew that what he was doing was not legal. And so by the time I was 7 years young, I was selling drugs with my dad. That was one of the businesses that we had. And then the other business is when I was 10 years young, I was bringing people from Tijuana, from Mexico into the US. And that led my parents also going like in and out of jail. And so I learned about entrepreneurship, but not from the best role models I can say in that aspect. In fact, because of those experiences, I had a lot of scarcity around money. I even had nightmares when I was like 10 and 12 where I would wake up in the middle of the night and like not joking or exaggerating, I would visualize, I would see money flying in the air, but it was like this, whoo, and I would see like a witch. So it was like a witch on a broom, money, this sounds like scary sounds. And so I had these negative beliefs about money because of how money was made in my family. So it was made illegally and in and out of jail. And of course, it created a lot of disruption mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in every aspect for my family, created a lot of chaos. And so, yeah, it just was not a good experience. So for me, I went through a lot of personal development, a lot of therapy, like over the last 10 years that helped me reframe those experiences and change the narrative around those stories so that I could get rid of those limiting beliefs because I used to think of money as like something that was bad and negative because of how it was made growing up.
That's so real. And I'm so glad that you share that because, Especially when you're a first generation wealth builder, like I think one of the most common things that I hear from people is this feeling of unworthiness of even having these thoughts of feeling like that you're deserving of more of abundance and all that stuff. And for a lot of us, we do come from these backgrounds where money was scarce, it was hard to make, and if you had it, it disappeared. And there's a lot of trauma that needs to be addressed if you're going to not only like build wealth but also retain it, right? So I'm glad that you mentioned that, you've been doing that work.
Yeah, before you go into the next part, you brought it up, and I want to tap into that a little bit. You mentioned about the money disappearing, right? My dad made money really fast, like really, really fast, but it was gone, like easy in, easy out. And so when he passed away, when I was 12, we didn't have money to buy flights to go to his funeral. That's how bad it was. Again, I just had to rewire and reframe everything about money.
Yeah, that's real. Okay, so talk me through your first real estate endeavor. So you mentioned you used the FHA program. How did you go about, getting the money together for a down payment, all that stuff? How did you navigate that?
So my very first business right after quitting my job at B of A is I became a professional dance instructor. I was teaching a dance called bachata, which I'm pretty sure most people have heard of it. And I started a nightclub. I started a festival, a choreography company when I was 20 with my dance partner at the time. I was actually doing pretty well. Like in my mid 20s, I was making already like about $250,000 a year. And so when it came to buying this first property, I purchased this piece of real estate in LA. It was 240,000. So the down payment was just about 8 grand when you do 3.5%. The seller paid the closing costs because nobody wanted to buy real estate in 2012. So all I had to do was pay the 8 grand. I think it was 8,200 for the down payment. I furnished the property. I lived in the master bedroom and I rented the other 3 bedrooms. And those 3 bedrooms covered the entire mortgage payment and the utilities. So that was something that I was looking for is I always thought of like leverage, right? Is how do I get this house and without having to pay the mortgage? And so I thought like, okay, well, let me get some roommates. And that was my very first introduction into buying real estate and real estate investing in general. Now, I always saved those mortgage payments as if I was making the mortgage payments, but I never had to. So I saved those 1,800 a month. For 2 years later, I had $43,200 from saving those mortgage payments. And rather than going and getting a Mercedes or a Benz or going on vacation, I thought, why don't I build a studio in the backyard? I went and got permits. I built a studio, new construction with permits from the city. I always tell my students, are you doing it with permits from the city or con el permiso de Dios? I did it with both. And now, once that was built, within 2.5 years, because I started renting that unit to a long-term tenant for 1,000 a month, and I basically recouped my entire investment within 2.5 years. So 2.5 years later, I got my 43,200 back. I'm living mortgage payment free in the main house, and I'm making $1,000 a month. Now, even though it's not a lot of money, for me, it was more of it was like a breakthrough because growing up, people always said, Jorgito, they said, Jorge, money doesn't grow on trees. Like I heard that all the time growing up. Like money is hard, it's complex, it requires a lot of work. You got to use your hands and you got to trade time for money. And what I proved to myself during that experience is that money does grow on trees if you learn how to plant money seeds.
That's powerful. So you were part of, is it the program by like Robert Kiyosaki? Is that okay? Yeah, so he's very much about this like idea of real estate leverage and using, real estate for building wealth. So what was it about that program that attracted you to want to learn more?
So I was looking for real estate investing. I was like, wherever I could find it, I just want to find somebody. And I was searching on Facebook. Les Brown was hosting a huge convention in LA. It was free. I went to that. From there, they sold this. They were selling real estate, stocks, Amazon, everything under the sun. Signed up for the real estate workshop. During the 3-day workshop, I invested $35,000 into their mentorship. And the biggest breakthrough that I had in the mentorship is learning the difference between good debt and bad debt. Because up until that time, I would send my mortgage payment. And in addition to my mortgage payment, I would always send an extra 3 to 5,000 to the principal. I was on track to paying off the house in the first 8 years. And then Mary Jo Wilson, my multimillionaire mentor, said, Jorge, why are you trying to pay off the house? I said, because I want to be financially free. She said, Mijo, that's not how you do it. She said, you're gonna be mortgage payment free, but guess what? You're still gonna need a job and you're still gonna be stuck in the rat race for the rest of your life. And I'm like, okay, well, what should I do? She said, what you should do is, she broke it down on paper. She said, you can take out $160,000 of equity, doing a refinance cash out, and I want you to go and buy two more houses, right? And that's what I did. She said, in 10 years, these property values are going to be double. So you'll have three times the equity, three times the net worth, three times the cash flow, three times the tax benefits. She said, and leverage is the name of the game. Just that lesson right there was worth my $35,000 investment, because there's no way I would be where I'm at today if it wasn't for that. Yeah, that was really powerful for me, is that shift.
Yeah. The first thing that I think about is spending that much money on, knowledge, investing in yourself is so not what people in our community do, right? Like, you don't spend money for somebody to teach you shit like this. I think the idea of coaching and personal development is still very much like it's just not a thing. And so, what do you think it is about you that made you comfortable making those decisions for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think all my life experiences, but there was one experience. November 11th of 2012, I had a back surgery. I had a herniated disc, and it was really bad. I couldn't dance, and I couldn't run, then I couldn't walk, and then I was laid on the floor, and I was hunched over, and I couldn't stand up straight. I had my sciatic nerve all the way down my leg. It was numb, and it was going on for about 2 3 years, where it just got worse over time. And so one day my wife was like, all right, let's go to Tijuana, because I didn't have insurance at the time. And the surgeon says, we need to do your surgery tomorrow at 7 a.m. He said, by the way, it's a 50-50 chance you'll ever walk again after this, because back surgeries work. So for me, when he told me that, I was like, oh my God, like I need my body to dance. Like I'm a professional dancer. I perform on stage, I teach choreography, I do quinceañeras, weddings. Like I need my body to make money. So that created a shift. I'm like, okay, well, I hope I can walk after this, but if I can't, like, what am I going to do? My career's done. And that's what made me think of passive income. I was like, I need to learn how to make money without trading time for money and without using my hands or my body. I need to learn how to use my brain, because that's also leverage. And that, I think people are motivated by where they want to go, or by going away from pain. And sometimes the pain is way more motivating than the outcomes that we want. And so that experience of my back surgery and potentially not being able to walk was enough motivation for me to go and find something. And I was willing to pay whatever it took. Now, given I was a really good saver at the time, because I had that Dave Ramsey mentality of get out of debt, save your money. And so I had a lot of money under my pillow. And so for me, it was not a challenge to invest that money, because I had, way more than that at the time. But I was motivated to learn how to use leverage, learn how to use my mind. And the other motivation that I had too is, in 2014, I made a vision board, and on that vision board, my number one goal was to buy my mom a house. At the time, my mom was living 2 days with me, then my brother, then my sister, then my auntie, then her friend. And then at one point, she lived in a garage. Like she didn't really have a home to call home, but I didn't know how to buy investment properties, just my home. So when I joined Rich Dad, I still remember that day that I made the investment. I called my mom, and for some reason I just started crying, and like a ugly crying. She's like, Nico, ¿qué tienes? Like, talk to me. Are you okay? And I just couldn't talk. And then I finally was able to gather myself, and I said, Mom, I figured out how I'm going to buy you your house. And 18 months later, I bought her the house. I just had a lot of motivation. I was trying to get it. I had pain motivation, and I had a lot of motivation as to the outcomes and these goals and getting my mom a house.
That's beautiful. I love that story. Okay, let's go back to your first house hack, right? Because that's what you were doing. You were literally having other people living in the house with you, paying the mortgage, and you were reaping the benefits of that. I think a lot of folks love the idea, right? Like on paper, but then they think about, I'm grown as hell. Who am I? Why do I want some fucking roommates in my house? So, can you talk to us a little bit about the power of delaying that gratification for the long term vision? Like, how do you stay focused when it's not easy in the beginning?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't believe that it is for everybody, right? Like if you're married and you have kids, probably not a good idea to be sharing with other adults who you don't know. And that's just kind of weird. But at the time, again, I was in my 20s, I was single, and everything was about, like you said, right? Delaying gratification. And so I was willing to do whatever it took to just keep more money in my pocket. And that's what I believed. I said, I'm going to save all this money and then I'm going to build more units. I'm going to buy more units and do more house hacking. And that was the game plan. And even in 2017, me and my wife bought our first house together. And at the time, we're engaged. We're getting married in a few months, but we're still not pregnant. We don't have kids. Now we have two daughters, but we still wanted to house hack, but we wanted to do it in a way where we wouldn't share with other people, but how can we still do it? So we bought this property that was 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and I was able to divide the house into 2 units. So each house had their own entrance, their own bathrooms, their own kitchen. We never saw each other because it's basically 2 duplexes now. And we put one side on Airbnb. We lived on the other side and we lived mortgage payment free. And in 3 years, Janice, we saved $100,000 worth of mortgage payments that we took and just go and buy more real estate. Just speaking of delayed gratification, right? Up until like even last year in 2022, we were living in Pico Rivera, which I don't know if you're from this area, but it's like a C-class neighborhood. The average income there is like 600,000. At the time, we're already like multimillionaires, but nobody knows that. Like we didn't buy a home over 1 million until this year. Like I didn't start buying like nice cars until this year. But we could have been doing this like 2 years ago. But again, we were practicing delayed gratification. I think one of the problems with entrepreneurs is that they start to create some profits and results and they start spending it, right? They renovate their homes, they buy the car they want, they go on vacation. But for me, I just created a snowball effect where I wanted it to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And I think you have to know your own personality and just like what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not. I think everybody's journey is going to look different, and that's okay. Like there's no right or wrong way to do it as long as you have that long-term vision, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about Airbnb. How did you first get started with the platform? What is it that attracted you to it versus, just being like a traditional long-term landlord?
Yeah, so one of my students in 2016 mentioned this. One of my dance students told me how she was making 3.5 times with short-term rentals compared to what she was making with long-term rentals. I thought she was crazy. I'm like, what do you mean 3.5 times? What's this Airbnb thing? So I had some leases that were ending in the beginning of 2017, right, from those bedrooms, just from like other units. So I figured, you know what, as these leases are ending at the beginning of 2017, I'm going to renovate these properties and then I'm going to start putting them on Airbnb one by one. So in March of 2017, just about almost 6 years ago, we launched 4 Airbnbs that month on properties that we already owned. And we went from making on average 1,500 per unit to 3,500 per unit. So that took us from 6K a month to 14K a month just by switching to short-term rentals. Now, given these were like in areas in Southern California where there's a large population, a lot of tourism. So definitely it is about the right properties and the right location as well. But that was mind blowing to me. I was like, wow, like we literally almost tripled 2.5 times what we were making. And I just never looked back. So from there, obviously it was impossible to just buy a house every couple months because I didn't have the capital to do that. That's when I learned about arbitrage. And so that's where you rent properties, get permission in writing from the owners, and then launch them on Airbnb. So in 2019, I went all in on that strategy and got like 7 properties all within subleasing, which then I took that capital and started buying more real estate. Like I said, now we have a portfolio of 18 short-term rentals, 8 that we own that are on Airbnb, 7 that we sublease, and 3 that we manage.
That's incredible. Okay, I have to play devil's advocate because I know there's some people that are very like anti Airbnb for several reasons. One, and probably the most common, is that there's a sense that it's making the real estate market more competitive. It's cutting down access to housing. It can, be messing with the equilibrium, if you will, of the housing market in general. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I forgot the numbers. I mentioned these numbers on a podcast the other day, but I think there's about 640,000 like short-term rentals. And there's like, I don't know how many, like millions and millions and millions of properties that exist. So when you look at how many short-term rentals versus the inventory of real estate, it's like 0.00, like it's not even close, anywhere close to like 1% or even a tenth of a percent. So in the grand scheme of things, Airbnb is just like this tiny little thing that exists within the inventory. I do feel that it does make an impact, right? Because when people are utilizing these properties for short-term rentals, it does take away from the inventory, which makes rents go higher, which makes prices go higher. But I think there's like a lot of other reasons as to why we are where we are with prices, interest rates, and inventory. And Airbnb is like a tiny, tiny piece of that.
Okay. I think that's fair. Okay, so what are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about running an Airbnb? Because I feel like, there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, passive income, you don't have to do anything, just sign up and you're going to make a shit ton of money. Is that really the case? Or like, what is actually the real deal?
It's definitely a lot of work, right? I think people always underestimate how much work it is to launch an Airbnb. Like it's a lot of work, right? From putting the furniture list together, getting all those Amazon boxes to show up to your house, getting somebody to put them in, to assembling and doing the decor, photography, creating the listing. The great thing is, if you remember back in the day, we had that commercial, set it and forget it. I really do believe that if you like Airbnbs are not passive, right? It's a very, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of operations, but just like any business, right? If you're smart and if you know how to build a team and if you know how to build a system, it could be like a 80 to 90% passive business. Like personally, I could delete the app off my phone, never check it, and it would be fine only because I have a badass manager that handles everything. And I rather make 80% of the profit while doing like 5% of the work than make 80% of the profit, but do 80% of the work. You get me? So again, it's not passive, but if you build a team and a system, it could be a mostly passive income business. I would say the biggest misconception is that you have to buy real estate. When you talk about building a short-term rental business, people's objection is always, well, I don't have 20% down to buy a property and pay all the furniture. But again, like I would say 95% of our students all start with the arbitrage model and the subleasing model. And the three most important steps is you have to first verify if, because one of the challenges is regulation. That's probably the biggest challenge. So you have to call the local building department and make sure you can actually get a permit. And I would say only launch where you can get a permit. Because if you go into a gray area where they're not issuing permits, what if in 6 months they start issuing permits or they ban it? Now you're stuck. So you got to make sure you can get a permit. That's number one. Number two is use MashVisor and AirDNA in order to check the comps, to check if you can make double or more, whatever you're going to pay in rent. And then the third one is to get permission in writing. Hey, Jorge Contreras has permission to use this property as a short-term rental.
Awesome. Okay. When it comes to the actual process or the operations of managing an Airbnb, I know, a lot of folks use property managers, they have cleaning companies, et cetera, systems, software. What do you think are like the key strategies there? Like what's the bare minimum you should be planning to budget for or account for in this process?
The number one thing is to stay away from property management companies because they're going to charge 20 to 35% of your gross revenue. And in most cases, that is your profit. Like if you're for us, we make 30% profit from the gross revenue. If I paid a manager 30%, I would be doing it just for tax benefits and no cash flow. And especially when you're getting started, the most important thing is cash flow because almost everyone's goal is to replace your 9 to 5. So my suggestion and what I do is we build an in-house team. So like I'll hire a property manager that is only managing my property, somebody that I have in a relationship with, somebody that I know, that I trust, that maybe has experience or they have the right attitude. I've always learned hire for attitude and train for skill. I'd rather hire someone that's got a great attitude, great work ethic, and I'll train them how to be a manager. And then they can run my business and it's going to be way less on cost than delegating to a large company that has a lot of expenses and overhead.
That makes a lot of sense. And for finding like, cleaning companies and things like that, like is there resources for Airbnb hosts to find?
There's a website called Thumbtack. You can also use Yelp, social media. And the other one that I love using is TaskRabbit platforms where you can find people for cleaning. I would also ask people. Word of mouth has been a way that I have found a lot of cleaners as well. Same thing for maintenance people. And you need somebody to clean, somebody to do maintenance. Those people always have to be there physically. The third one is somebody virtual that could be anywhere in the world. They never have to see the properties. And that's your VA, your virtual assistant. I recommend using upwork.com to hire a virtual assistant like in Mexico, South America, or Central America, somewhere. That way they're in a similar time zone and they can handle all the communications for you.
Love it. Okay. How much does Airbnb charge for fees and how do you account for that in the overall like per night stay that you charge?
So they charge the host 3% and they charge the guest an additional 14%. For us as the host, we get to keep 97% of all the revenue, which we don't have to do marketing, no sales. You don't need a website. You don't need a payment processor. Airbnb takes care of all that for 3%. I think that's a great deal.
Absolutely. I've seen recently that there's a lot of pushback from folks who feel like Airbnb hosts are asking them to do way too much shit. Like, you got to be cleaning the house and changing the sheets. And it's like, if I want to do all this, I might as well just stay in my house, right? Or go to a hotel where I know nobody's going to ask me to like strip the bed. What is your thoughts on like what's the appropriate thing for Airbnb hosts to ask of their guests versus like what's just overkill?
Yeah, so here's what we do, and I think it's pretty straightforward. And I personally don't think it's an overkill. We stay at Airbnbs all the time, and we comply to the same rules. But one is to do their own dishes, right? Especially if people are like cooking and they're having a carne asada. We don't want them to leave the pots and pans with food because what if there's no bookings for 3 days and then it turns into mold and then it smells? So I say, hey, just do your dishes and take out the trash. Like that would be like the bare minimum. We do tell them if they didn't use any beds, just leave the beds and the other beds if they could put the sheets on the floor and like the towels. It makes it easy for our crew to know which beds were used, and that's about it. But we don't ask them to do any deep cleaning or things like that. But that's pretty standard in like most Airbnbs is at least do your dishes and take out the trash.
Yeah. Okay. And when it comes to making your listing stand out on Airbnb, do you have any tips for how to do that?
100%. So number one is location, 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 right? Getting a property in the better areas where there's a larger population, like near downtown, the beach, or the theme parks. Even if you have to pay an extra couple hundred, rather than going to a secondary or a tertiary market like in the outskirts, I would rather pay more and be in a primary market because those properties will always perform better, especially during a recession. People are going to stay there more than in the outskirts. So number one is be in an area where there's a large population or like the downtown, the theme parks, the beach. Number two is we are playing a game of whoever has the most and best amenities win. So if you have the ability to get a property that has a pool, a jacuzzi, and a game room, or just one of those, that's going to perform way better than a property that doesn't. And the reason is people stay at Airbnbs for two reasons. One, they're staying at your property because they're going to this conference and you're 5 minutes away. Or two, they want to book your property because they can have a staycation experience, which means they can have a good time in the home without needing to leave the home. So if you can combine both, have the amenities and be in close proximity, then you'll be like in the top 3% of inventory.
That's awesome advice. Okay, so I know it's not all like rainbows and unicorns. So what's the Airbnb horror story that you can share with us of something that just went incredibly wrong?
Personally, I don't have any crazy ones, but just this weekend, one of my students texted me and they had a break in their property, and the property was like vandalized and it was like really bad. They had to get the cops out there. And again, I didn't go into detail. They just sent me a text, so I don't know why it happened. So I can't really say, oh, here's how to prevent it. But that's the maybe the first time I hear of like vandalism at a property. But again, this is something that I guess if somebody knows that these properties are vacant, like somebody could try to go in there. But again, from hundreds and hundreds of Airbnb launches, the first time that I heard, and that's pretty bad, right? Because now it kind of ruined their New Year's experience. They were feeling sad, and now they got to deal with this, and they didn't feel like celebrating. It just like killed their energy. That's like a recent situation. Everything else is stuff that we've been able to handle. Like maybe about 6 months ago, I had a family at one of my properties that stuffed way too much toilet paper down the toilet and it overflowed and like everything just came out and it went into like the different living areas of the property. I never saw it, but Obviously, it was bad. My cleaners took like 6 hours to clean it. I had to get a plumber out there. So unfortunate situations like that happen from time to time, but they're things that we can fix. So not that big of a deal.
Absolutely. And I think that just emphasizes the fact that when you're running any type of business, you have to plan for emergencies. You got to have extra cash, sitting on hand, and you just got to have a plan, an action plan, right? When it comes to being selective about Airbnb guests, like, is there ways to make better decisions so that you can at least try to ensure that the people who are staying in your properties are not going to like go nuts and do something stupid?
Yeah. The great thing is we're in the social proof economy, right? So if five people already said that, hey, Janice is a great guest, then I'm going to say, hey, she must be a great guest. Same thing. If so and so has, three negative reviews, then I'm going to, have to decide if I want to let that property stay at my property. So we're able to see those reviews before we let somebody book our property. Something to look out for if you're hosting larger properties where you're hosting 8 people and more, especially if they're like single family homes, is if you notice that somebody from the same city is trying to book your property and it's a brand new profile and they have no reviews, they probably are trying to throw a party, right?
Mhm.
This is where you want to put your detective hat on and start asking questions like, "Hey, what brings you into town?" And like, if somebody says, "Oh, we're going to, the Temerarios concert," right? I'm gonna be, okay, cool. Well, let me check if they're actually in town. Like, I'm gonna do some research and make sure there's actually a Temerarios concert. Like I want to know. And if I just get like this weird feeling that they're maybe lying and they want to throw a party, like I'll say, "Hey, just to let you know, the neighbor next door is, LAPD, and this guy doesn't take shit from nobody. Like he will shut you down. He will give you a ticket. Like I'll scare them." That's when you have to put your investigator hat. But other than that, like I said, you can go based on reviews. And typically, for the most part, you'll have a bad apple every once in a while. But for the most part, we're able to attract, good guests.
Yeah. Are you actually the one who's like verifying these people, or or you have your VA doing that?
I used to do it, but now with so many Airbnbs between my manager and my VA, they do all that verification. And every once in a while, I'll step in, but it's mostly hands off.
Okay. Speaking of reviews, how do you deal with the negative review from a guest?
Yeah, the secret is how to prevent it, which I'll talk about in a second. Because once they leave a review, there's nothing that you can do about it in order to remove it. Like they could lie. Like your property could be the most amazing property, and they can say, you know what, it was dirty. I didn't like the area, and I'll never book again. And Airbnb allows them to say whatever they want as long as they're not, cussing or making any threats. They can say whatever they want. The best way to prevent, a lot of times, let's say a guest checks out and they leave the property extra dirty. They didn't do their dishes, they didn't throw out the trash, and it was excessively dirty. And if you submit a claim, those people might be like, well, isn't that what the cleaning fee is for? And they might get upset that now you're trying to charge them a second cleaning fee. So now they're going to leave you a bad review. So the secret sauce here is reach out to the guest, ask them to leave you a review, and once they submit the review, then you sneak in the claim. So that way you get an honest review and you collect your monies, because again, if you just submit the claim, you're going to get a bad review. So that's like some of what, a little bit of what we do to make sure we get the best of both worlds.
Okay. I love it. Okay, so for folks that want to get started in this process, what's your best advice? Like what's one or two things that they should start thinking about doing now? Do they need to like create an LLC? Like what's the process?
Yeah, ideally they should create an LLC for two reasons. One, it gives you credibility when you're speaking to landlords or property management companies, because instead of saying, "Hey, this is Jorge," it's like, "Oh, this is my name, the name of my company." So it sounds more professional. But two, once you set up your LLC, set up a business checking account, and apply for a business credit card, now you're building business credit, and you can use that business credit card to pay for like furniture, even to pay rent and deposits, and then you could use the profits from the Airbnb to then pay back the credit card. But yeah, the LLC is definitely a must. On top of that, just for the asset protection, right? Especially if you own other businesses or you have money in your bank account. If there was ever a lawsuit, knock on wood, ideally that LLC will give you a layer of protection.
Do you have an LLC for each property or you just have them all in one?
So I'm in the beautiful state of California where LLCs are super expensive to maintain, 800 franchise fee every year. So for like my first 4 properties that I owned, we did have, me and my wife, like 1 LLC per property. Now, we're starting to put like 2 to 3 properties per LLC for the ones we own. On the subleases, we put them all in 1 LLC.
There's like so much to learn here, and I know folks are going to want to find out so much more about you and how they can work with you to learn about this whole process. So tell us about how you work with your students to empower them to become Airbnb hosts.
Yeah, definitely. We have group coaching, one-on-one coaching. We give them access to like softwares, online course. We have like 6 coaching calls a week, subleasing, purchasing, business credit, the tax side, the legal side. So we teach them everything about building a team and a system. And I'm always hosting workshops. Like every month, I do a webinar or like a 5-day challenge. So yeah, if they head on over to my Instagram, they'll be able to see the link in my bio or my stories. And there's always something and an opportunity to learn.
Amazing. Jorge, your story is so inspiring, and I can't wait for folks to hear it and find out more about you. And I'm just like so excited to see, especially Latino men, like representing wealth building in our community. Please keep going because I am rooting for your success.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.